Late winter lingers longer in central Alaska than maps suggest. Snow remains in shaded ground well into spring, and the rivers move beneath ice that thins unevenly with the lengthening days. The land north of the Alaska Range stretches outward in wide intervals of forest and open muskeg, broken by braided waterways and low ridges shaped by glacial retreat. Distances are difficult to measure by sight alone. Hills appear close and remain hours away. The Stampede Trail runs west from the small settlement of Healy, a remnant of an unfinished mining road cut decades earlier. Portions of it fade into marshland. In places it is little more than a suggestion pressed into the earth by old machinery and occasional travelers. Beyond the last maintained sections, human presence becomes irregular. Cabins stand abandoned. Rusted equipment sinks slowly into the soil. Silence dominates for long periods, interrupted only by wind through spruce and the distant movement of water. Spring brings gradual change rather than renewal. Snowmelt swells creeks into fast channels. The ground softens, making travel uncertain. Animals move along established routes, moose through willow thickets, small game along riverbanks, guided by seasonal patterns older than any road. Weather shifts without announcement. Clear mornings give way to cold rain or sudden wind. Temperatures fall sharply after sunset. In this region, survival depends less on dramatic events than on accumulation, distance, exposure, and time spent beyond assistance. By early 1992, the interior remained largely unchanged from decades before. The land required patience and knowledge. Those who entered it alone became small within it, absorbed by scale rather than confronted by it. Christopher Johnson McCandless was born in 1968 and raised primarily in Annandale, Virginia, a suburb shaped by government work and steady professional routines. His parents were educated and financially stable. Expectations followed a familiar pattern: academic achievement, career preparation, gradual entry into adult responsibility. McCandless performed well within that structure. He was an attentive student and an accomplished runner during high school, known for endurance rather than speed. He attended Emory University in Atlanta, graduating in 1990 with a degree in history and anthropology. Professors later described him as intelligent and serious, drawn to questions of morality and social organization. During these years he read widely, particularly writers who examined individual independence and resistance to conformity. Works by Jack London, Henry David Thoreau, and Leo Tolstoy held lasting influence. Their descriptions of self-reliance and deliberate simplicity shaped how he evaluated modern life. After graduation, McCandless departed from expected plans. Without informing his family, he donated most of his savings to charity and began traveling across the United States under the name Alexander Supertramp. He moved largely by hitchhiking, carrying minimal possessions. Over nearly 2 years he traveled through Arizona, California, South Dakota, and Mexico, working temporary jobs when necessary and forming brief but documented friendships with people he encountered along the way. Those who met him during this period often recalled discipline and intensity. He avoided long commitments and rarely stayed in one place. Letters and journal fragments indicate a deliberate attempt to detach from financial dependence and social obligation. He rejected what he saw as excess and artificial comfort, seeking instead experiences he considered direct and unmediated. His travels were not entirely without preparation. He learned basic survival skills through experience, handling canoes during a solo trip down the Colorado River, working manual labor jobs, and spending extended periods outdoors. Yet his knowledge remained uneven. He possessed determination and physical fitness, but lacked long-term wilderness training common among experienced Alaskan hunters or trappers. By late 1991, the idea of traveling to Alaska had taken firm shape. For McCandless, Alaska represented more than geography. It appeared, in his writing, as a final test of independence, a landscape large enough to remove distraction and compel self-reliance. He imagined a period of solitude in which daily survival would replace modern concerns. In April 1992, after wintering intermittently in the western United States, he traveled north through Canada and into Alaska. He arrived with limited equipment, a small caliber rifle, basic camping gear, several books, and a bag of rice intended as a staple food supply. He carried no detailed topographic maps of the region he planned to enter. His understanding of the interior came largely from conversations and general descriptions rather than technical planning. People who encountered him shortly before he left for the wilderness later recalled confidence mixed with urgency. He spoke openly about living alone for an extended period. The journey was framed not as exploration but as a personal experiment. In late April, he accepted a ride from a local resident who drove him toward the Stampede Trail. Snow still lingered across the ground. Rivers remained cold with meltwater. At the edge of the road system, McCandless gathered his belongings, thanked the driver, and began walking west. From that point forward, assistance would depend entirely on chance. The Stampede Trail extended into the interior without clear boundaries. What had once been intended as access for mining operations had never fully developed, leaving behind sections of rough track interrupted by water crossings and overgrown stretches of forest. In late April 1992, snow covered portions of the ground but had begun to soften under longer daylight hours. Travel was possible on foot, though slow. Christopher McCandless moved west along the trail carrying a backpack estimated at roughly 25 to 30 pounds. His equipment was limited, a .22 caliber semi-automatic rifle with several boxes of ammunition, a sleeping bag, a small tent, cooking supplies, a field guide to local plants, personal notebooks, and approximately 10 pounds of rice. He wore work boots and layered clothing suited more for spring conditions than prolonged wilderness residence. After several days of walking, he encountered an abandoned Fairbanks City Transit bus, vehicle number 142, left decades earlier by a construction crew. The bus stood slightly off the trail in a clearing near the Taclanica River. Its windows were mostly intact, and bunks and a stove remained inside. For travelers passing through the region, it occasionally served as temporary shelter. McCandless chose to remain there. The decision marked a shift from movement to settlement. The bus provided protection from wind and precipitation and reduced the immediate need to construct shelter. Nearby terrain offered access to small game and edible plants during warmer months. A stream ran within walking distance. At the time of his arrival, conditions appeared manageable. Snow was retreating, and animal tracks were visible in the surrounding area. Early journal entries suggest optimism. He documented hunting attempts, exploration of nearby ground, and the gradual organization of supplies within the bus. The location felt remote but not yet confining. The trail behind him remained passable, and rivers were still relatively low before peak snowmelt. What remained unclear to him was how quickly the landscape would change. As spring advanced, rising temperatures fed water into the surrounding drainage systems. Snowpack from higher elevations began moving downstream. Channels that could be crossed on foot in April would soon become fast, cold barriers. The isolation of the area was not immediate, it developed gradually, shaped by seasonal timing rather than sudden disaster. By choosing to stay, McCandless unknowingly committed himself to conditions that would soon prevent an easy return. During the first weeks at the abandoned bus, daily life followed a steady rhythm. The structure offered protection uncommon in remote travel. Its metal frame shielded against wind, and the raised interior kept sleeping space dry even as ground moisture increased with thawing snow. McCandless arranged his belongings carefully, creating designated areas for cooking, resting, and storing food. Order reduced uncertainty. He began each day by surveying the surrounding terrain. Tracks in soft soil revealed movement of small animals. Snowshoe hares and squirrels appeared most frequently, and birds returned as temperatures rose. Using his rifle, he hunted regularly, recording successes and failures in brief journal entries. The .22 caliber weapon required patience and proximity, ammunition was limited, encouraging deliberate use. Rice served as a consistent base for meals. Small amounts were cooked alongside whatever meat he obtained. Early entries indicate adequate nutrition. He experimented with preserving excess meat by smoking or drying it, though fluctuating temperatures complicated the process. Without sustained cold or proper curing methods, spoilage occurred quickly. Foraging became part of his routine as spring advanced. Guided by a regional plant book, he collected wild potato roots, berries when available, and edible greens emerging from thawed soil. These additions supplemented calories but required time and careful identification. Knowledge accumulated slowly through observation rather than instruction. Reading occupied long periods, especially during poor weather. Books carried into the wilderness included works of literature and philosophical writing. Marginal notes later found in these volumes suggest ongoing reflection rather than boredom. Writing also continued. His journal entries remained concise, focused on activities rather than emotion, weather conditions, animals seen, food gathered. Isolation did not yet present itself as strain. The lengthening daylight hours of early summer reduced darkness to only brief intervals. Sound traveled far across open ground, and the environment felt active with seasonal change. Insects emerged. River levels rose gradually but remained distant from immediate concern. Physical condition during this period appeared stable. Hunting successes provided protein, and movement across uneven terrain maintained endurance. The bus functioned as a fixed point from which daily excursions extended outward in widening circles. Time passed without clear markers beyond weather and food supply. Weeks blended together through repetition. Routine created stability, allowing McCandless to live according to a pattern he had sought for years, survival determined by direct effort rather than schedule or obligation. The landscape, however, continued changing in ways that routine could not fully account for. By early summer, the interior of Alaska entered a brief period of abundance. Vegetation thickened along riverbanks, and daylight extended late into the night. The forest surrounding the bus grew dense with new growth, altering visibility and movement. What had appeared sparse weeks earlier now required effort to cross. Insects multiplied, filling still air with constant motion. McCandless expanded his range of activity. He walked farther from the bus in search of game and edible plants, following animal paths through brush and open patches of tundra. Hunting remained inconsistent. Small animals provided occasional success, but calories gained rarely matched energy spent pursuing them. Ammunition gradually diminished, reinforcing caution with each shot. In June, he succeeded in killing a moose, the largest animal he encountered during his stay. The event represented a significant but complicated achievement. Without experience in large game processing, preserving the meat proved difficult. He attempted to smoke portions over a fire and dry others in open air, methods used traditionally in the region. Warm temperatures and insects interfered. Much of the meat spoiled before it could be consumed. Later notes indicated frustration at the loss, not dramatic but factual, acknowledging wasted effort and resources. Foraging became increasingly important. Using his plant guide, McCandless gathered roots and shoots common to the area, including wild potato and other edible vegetation. Identification relied heavily on visual comparison with printed descriptions. The process carried uncertainty, similar-looking plants shared habitats, and subtle differences mattered. Weather patterns shifted frequently. Rain alternated with clear days, saturating ground and complicating fire building. Mosquitoes and flies increased physical strain during outdoor work. Despite these conditions, journal entries suggest continued discipline. He documented meals, hunting outcomes, and distances walked, maintaining a sense of structure. The Teclanica River, located east of the bus along the trail he had entered, transformed during this period. Fed by melting snowpack from higher elevations, its volume increased steadily. Channels widened, and currents strengthened. Though not immediately visible from his shelter, the river's change would later define his situation. Food supply became less predictable as weeks passed. Small game fluctuated, and edible plants required more searching. Rice reserves diminished gradually, measured in careful portions. Physical exertion increased as nutritional intake slowly declined. The environment did not change abruptly. Instead, pressure accumulated through small imbalances, energy spent exceeding energy gained, distance growing harder to cover, and seasonal shifts narrowing available options. The routine continued, but its margins became thinner. By late July and early August, the balance between effort and nourishment had shifted beyond recovery. McCandless's remaining food sources provided insufficient calories to sustain prolonged activity. Hunting attempts became less frequent, likely limited by fatigue and reduced mobility. The rifle that once extended his reach could no longer compensate for declining strength. Journal entries from this period show noticeable change. Notes became sparse and functional, often limited to single lines recording small amounts of food gathered or brief observations about condition. The consistency that had marked earlier weeks began to dissolve. Days were no longer organized around exploration but around conservation of energy. Foraging continued despite diminishing returns. Edible plants available near the bus had already been harvested repeatedly, requiring longer walks for smaller quantities. Among the plants he consumed were wild potato seeds and other vegetation identified through his field guide. Later analysis suggested the possibility that some seeds he ate contained toxic compounds or mold-related contamination, though historians and researchers continue to debate the precise role these plants played. What remains certain is that his nutritional intake fell sharply below what was required for survival. At some point, McCandless again attempted to leave the area. Evidence indicates he moved toward the river but lacked the strength to attempt a crossing. The Teclanica remained swollen and dangerous, its cold current unchanged. The failed effort confirmed the limits imposed not only by geography but by physical decline. Weight loss accelerated. Starvation progresses in stages, depletion of fat reserves followed by breakdown of muscle tissue. Weakness increases gradually, affecting coordination and judgment. Simple tasks require extended effort. Movement slows, and rest periods lengthen. The process is quiet and cumulative rather than dramatic. Inside the bus, daily activity narrowed. Cooking required gathering fuel, an increasingly demanding task. Writing continued intermittently. One entry acknowledged the need for help, marking a shift from earlier self-reliance toward recognition of vulnerability. He prepared a note requesting assistance and placed it where it might be seen by a passing hunter or traveler. Time lost clear definition. Without sufficient energy, routine dissolved into cycles of rest and brief effort. Weather began to hint at seasonal change as late summer approached, nights growing cooler and daylight shortening slightly. The abundance of early summer faded. In mid-August 1992, McCandless died inside the bus. The official cause was determined to be starvation, though contributing factors, including possible plant toxicity and prolonged malnutrition, remain subjects of continued study. There was no sign of external injury or sudden event. The end came as the final stage of gradual physical failure. The bus remained quiet afterward, standing unchanged along the trail. The last written entry attributed to Christopher McCandless was dated in mid-August 1992. The note, brief and direct, stated that he was injured, extremely weak, and unable to hike out. He expressed gratitude for the life he had lived and asked for assistance from anyone who might find him. The message was signed with the name he had used during his travels, followed by his given name. It was placed where it could be seen near the bus. After that point, no further records exist. Evidence inside the shelter suggested that activity had already slowed significantly. Personal belongings remained organized. Books lay near the sleeping area. Cooking equipment showed limited recent use. There were no indications of struggle or attempts to relocate the camp. His sleeping bag was arranged on a bunk toward the rear of the bus, where he remained. Summer moved gradually toward autumn. Temperatures lowered at night, and vegetation began its seasonal decline. The Stampede Trail saw occasional hunters and travelers, though few passed close enough to notice the bus during those weeks. The isolation that had formed through geography and timing continued uninterrupted. On September 6, 1992, a group of moose hunters approached the abandoned vehicle while exploring the area. One entered and discovered McCandless's body inside the sleeping bag. Authorities were notified, and Alaska state troopers reached the site shortly afterward. Identification was made through personal documents and photographs found among his belongings. An investigation concluded that death had occurred several weeks earlier. The official determination listed starvation as the primary cause. His body showed severe weight loss consistent with prolonged malnutrition. Journal entries, photographs, and equipment were collected as part of the record, providing a detailed timeline of his stay. The bus remained in place after the investigation, returning to silence once officials departed. The surrounding land showed little sign that anything unusual had occurred. Seasonal change continued as it always had, unaffected by individual events. The story, however, began to move outward beyond the trail. In the years following the discovery, the abandoned bus along the Stampede Trail became a point of attention far removed from its original purpose. Journalists, readers, and later travelers attempted to understand the circumstances that had brought Christopher McCandless into the Alaskan interior and kept him there until the end. His writings and photographs offered a rare record of prolonged solitude, documented not by observers but by the individual living within it. Interpretations varied. Some viewed the journey as a search for independence shaped by literary ideals. Others regarded it as a demonstration of how limited preparation can narrow survival margins in remote environments. The landscape itself remained unchanged by these discussions. The same rivers rose each spring. The same seasonal cycles governed movement and access. Over time, increasing numbers of visitors attempted to reach the bus, drawn by the story. Several required rescue, and some lost their lives attempting river crossings similar to the one that had stopped McCandless. Decades later, authorities removed the vehicle to prevent further accidents, separating the physical site from the narrative attached to it. What endured was not the object but the record left behind, brief journal lines, photographs taken in quiet moments, and evidence of a life lived deliberately within isolation. The wilderness neither opposed nor protected him. It continued according to its own rhythms. In the northern interior, silence remains the dominant condition, unchanged long after individual stories pass through it.